Watch this.
A lot of ways to spend $1.9 billion. Well, Republican lawmakers think the best way is to not spend it at all, to give it back to Idahoans. But not everyone believes this early session bill would benefit every Idahoan in the best way. It's a popular place for bathers, but also vandals. The Forest Service has an idea they hope will help keep Kirkham Hot Springs open and clean. It was born out of inspiration, inspired by what a Boise State professor said about women in college. And now a scholarship to inspire women has tripled in size in less than a month. So what to do with nearly $2 billion? Idaho's record surplus has Idaho lawmakers wasting little time figuring out what exactly to do with it. Day 3 of the 2022 session, Idaho Republicans already have a major tax bill in the works, and they are touting it as a great give back to Idahoans. The Dems, however, argue this proposed legislation would mostly and unfairly just give back to the state's wealthiest. The middle class, they say, would benefit more from a tax break. Joe Paris listened to those on both sides of this bill to ask the question, is this the one, or does this one still need some work?
Idaho lawmakers hit the ground running this week, and already they have a major tax bill to debate. Idaho Republicans are touting this new legislation as a simple give back and tax cut for Idahoans as the state sits on millions and millions in budget surplus dollars.
We've got inflation going crazy across the nation and across the state. It's important to get this money back to the people.
House Majority Leader Republican Mike Moyle is one of the sponsors of the tax bill. He says the bill will consolidate Idaho's income tax brackets from 5 down to 4 with the new lower rates of 1%, 3%, 4.5%, and 6% respectively for each bracket. Now, the highest tax bracket will be for people who make $5,000 and more. The bill would also lower the corporate income tax from 6.5% to 6%, and it also provides a one-time income tax rebate of $350 million, returning approximately 12% of Idaho taxes paid in 2020, or $75 for each taxpayer independent, whatever amount is greater.
Most people in Idaho are in that upper bracket, so we're taking care of most Idahoans with that bill. But it is, some people don't pay any taxes. It makes it hard to give back money when they don't pay taxes. That's why the bill's written the way it is, though. We do give them $75 for every man, woman, and child if they don't pay taxes.
Representative Moyle says with the budget surplus, Republicans simply want to give Idahoans their tax dollars back.
Get it to their hands so they can use it to kind of offset some of the costs that are going up now.
Idaho Democrats say they appreciate the idea, but that this tax bill doesn't help those who need it most.
Now we have an opportunity to prioritize working Idahoans and bolstering the middle class, and this tax bill would squander that opportunity.
Assistant House Minority Leader, Democrat Laura Necochea says the cuts would direct the largest benefits to the top of the income spectrum.
Idaho Democrats would love to see us take those dollars that we have that are available and put them into property tax reduction, and would also want to have a conversation about repealing the sales tax on groceries.
Necochea adds that the tax brackets proposed don't really translate to everyone giving a fair share.
Yeah, there's no reason why a millionaire should pay the same percentage of their tax as a teacher, and we would absolutely support expanding those tax brackets to make those adjustments.
Every man, woman, and child is going to get something. It's a good bill, and it's going to lower our tax rates, makes us more competitive nationwide. It's going to help the state of Idaho look better to bring businesses here, and it's going to help people stay in their homes and jobs and work here and stay here for their lives. It's going to make it better for Idahoans, which is a good thing.
Idaho Democrats argue the surplus being used for this cut really isn't a surplus, but instead the result of bad policies and investments.
We underfund a lot of the things that local government has to do and that schools have to do. So if we put more of that state funding and directed it to schools and local governments, we could reduce property taxes substantially, and that's what Idahoans are asking for.
Moyle says it doesn't have to be one or the other.
There's enough to do a lot of things that need to be done and want to be done for a long time.
Which is what I was just going to ask you, Joe. I mean, They could address this grocery bill tax and also the property tax thing at a later date, for sure. There's still a lot of time left in the legislation, but this is still fairly early, and is this one going to get enough traction to maybe even go to the governor's desk?
Well, some early indicators, Brian, to me from my sources in the State House and from the Idaho Republicans, is that there is some consensus that this is a winner, according to the Republicans. In the governor's office and Representative Moyle, who we just heard from, they both confirmed to me that the governor says if this were to get to his desk, this is a piece of legislation that he would sign off of. And really, Brian, when we heard the governor talk about a tax rebate plan or a tax cut plan in the state of the state on Monday, this is really what that legislation is. So Representative Moyle really works with some stakeholders, including the governor's office, to negotiate what this tax bill would look like. And Representative Moyle admitted to me it's not exactly what he would want, but it is the result of a compromise with the governor's office. And at the end of the day, the governor needs to sign off on it unless they override him. But it's important to have his support on this. Meanwhile, though, the Idaho Democrats are pushing back, saying there could be better ways to use this money.
So a compromise within the Republican Party, but not necessarily including the Democrats in this compromise, I guess.
Yeah, good clarifier there.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Joe. All right, we usually save our text messages for the end of the show, but once in a while, as you know, we like to pepper them in throughout the show to add a little spice to the 208 conversation. Over the last year and a half, we've gotten a lot of messages pointing out we tend to talk about COVID a lot, like this one yesterday from Jackie. Brian, she says, it upsets me more than I can say how your show's focus remains on the COVID issue. Do you really believe we are sitting at home with our pencils and paper taking notes on all the stats you share with us? Taking notes? No. Taking notice? Hopefully. Because unless you live through like World War II, this is likely the biggest crisis in several generations. And when it warrants it, we're going to talk about it. Like when our hospitals are operating under crisis standards of care and may do so again. Or when everyday services are shutting down because there aren't enough people who aren't sick or exposed to operate those things. All things that impact all of us. Yeah, there are feel-good features stories out there, which we would love to do a lot more of. But we also can't just bury our heads in the sand when it comes to a pandemic. We are, after all, still in the middle of one. Yesterday alone, Idaho saw its highest ever daily case count since the pandemic began. More than 2,200 cases in one day of COVID-19. And that doesn't include the nearly 14,000 cases still waiting to be processed, backlogged, some of which the state still has yet to process. And with Omicron, the cases out there, they tell us where the virus is spread, but what we're more concerned with are hospitalizations. On January 8th, the last day hospitalizations were updated on the state's website. There were 340 people in the hospital with COVID. It doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't admitted with something else, but they did have COVID nonetheless. However, not all hospitals reported their numbers, so that number is likely and actually probably higher than that. You can see that number isn't anywhere near the peak we saw back in September, which is right there marked on September 24th, but it's starting to grow a little bit. It's something Dr. Megan McInerney at St. Al's told us was going to happen when we spoke with her last week. On Monday, the state reported they had 29 ICU beds available. As of yesterday, there are only 8 ICU beds left, just 8, across the entire state. And no, not all of them are filled with COVID patients, but they're getting filled by a lot of other people as well. Should you write that number down? No, it's on a website if you need it. But should you or a family member need a hospital bed, it might be worth knowing why there may not be one available. So yes, it's important, and we're going to keep talking about it when we need to.
Healthcare systems across the state are seeing the number of COVID patients increase, while simultaneously seeing a decrease in the number of healthcare workers available to provide care due to the large number of healthcare workers who have been infected or exposed to COVID.
Basically, patients need people to take care of them when they're in the hospital. And if those healthcare providers aren't there, that's when the level of care suffers. And so do the staff covering for their colleagues who are quarantining. So some hospitals have changed their protocols, like in California, where according to new state guidelines, healthcare workers who test positive for COVID no longer have to isolate or test negative before returning to work, as long as they're asymptomatic and as long as they wear a mask. And at Legacy Health in Oregon, staff members who test positive are allowed to return to work even with mild symptoms. That would certainly help the situation here in Idaho, right, when it comes to staffing issues. But the hospitals we spoke with say they're following the CDC guidelines, which currently look like this. The CDC recommends isolating for 5 days. And after those 5 days, if you are asymptomatic or if you have not had a fever for at least 24 hours, you should wear a mask for another 5 days. These guidelines were issued before Omicron became the main variant of concern in the United States. So we asked St. Luke's, St. Alphonsus, and West Valley Medical Center to see if their policies have changed with the new variant. St. Luke's, they recently adopted and updated their COVID return to work guidelines. It says if an employee is symptomatic, they are eligible to return to work 5 days after symptom onset. They must also be free of a fever for 24 hours without the help of medication and have improving symptoms. If asymptomatic, they can return 5 days after a positive COVID test. However, employees are not required to return to work if they don't feel well enough to do so. West Valley Medical Center, similar policy. Anyone who tests positive must quarantine for 5 days at least. An employee can not return to work if they are still considered an infection risk with symptoms, and every employee's case is reviewed by an employee health nurse before they can just jump back into work. But once they are ready to come back, they must wear a mask, which is hospital policy. Employees do receive quarantine pay, by the way. We also reached out to St. Alphonsus, but we've yet to hear back about their policies. Good news for Jackie, we're moving on from COVID for now. Even more good news, a popular hot springs could soon see an upgrade. That is, as long as we can manage to keep it clean. Which is how we want your text messages. Clean, concise, and of course clever. And how about a few more than yesterday? Maybe you misplaced our number. It's 208-321-5614. Share with us what's on your mind. Just make sure to include your name and the hashtag #the208. We're going to be sure to share a few of your comments at the end of the show. It's arguably one of the most popular hot springs spots in Idaho. But unfortunately, too many people that have been using Kirkham Hot Springs have left behind more than their worries and their strife. Trash and reckless behavior at Kirkham has pushed wildlife away from what would be their winter hangout. But now some funding has come available that has the Forest Service trying to figure out how they can bring the old Kirkham back instead of just shutting it down for good. How? Here's Katya Stepovic.
We talked about potentially closing it this winter, but just didn't have the capacity to get that closure in place. And
Tracy Weaver, District Ranger for the Forest Service, says the litter left by humans, from needles to human waste, has been challenging while trying to keep Kirkham Hot Springs functional and a welcomed place for wildlife.
The monarch butterfly is potentially going to be listed as an endangered species. There's some milkweed there that is their favorite food source. It used to be a favorite place for wildlife to come through there in the winter months to, because the grass and such isn't as covered with snow right there because of the hot springs, and the animals would come and enjoy that. But when there's so many people there, the wildlife aren't using it to the extent they were before either.
Years ago, the Forest Service banned all campers due to constant mistreatment in the area. And now the stress of keeping the hot springs open for day use alone relies on volunteers.
Things so far this winter have improved over last winter, and I think it's the extra capacity we have with our community volunteers and folks just helping us keep an eye on things. But I think that's the biggest message, is we all need to take care of it to not risk having it closed.
And keeping the hot springs open will take more legwork than a handful of volunteers can tackle. So the Forest Service plans to spend $50,000 in funding from the Great American Outdoors Act to redesign the area.
Some boardwalks or something to keep people from trampling all of the sensitive vegetation around the hot springs, new interpretive signs, changing rooms, that sort of thing to just help it accommodate the amount of use that it gets, but also very thoughtful in how many parking places are there, so that we can, in some sense, limit the use a little bit so that it doesn't get so overrun.
She adds that the Forest Service is also thinking of making the day use area concession run to ensure that people don't overstay their welcome and to turn people away when the lot is full.
We need folks to honor that, to pay the day use fee, to so that they can help us maintain it. To avoid leaving any trash behind. Pack it in, pack it out. That takes everybody that uses it doing their part to be able to make sure we keep Kirkham open into the future.
Yeah, you would certainly think people would get that by now, but it's a learning process. Design changes won't even start until next year, 2023. Before that, they will share options for the redesign with the public for many comments. Not sure when that will take place, but of course, we'll keep our viewers updated.
Yeah, you think people would figure out. I mean, just looking at those images from when it was just a trash heap, I mean, people would look at that and go, this probably isn't how we should do this.
Yeah, and it's nature. You want to ignore humanity and all the things that come with it.
Okay, so just to be clear, it is open for this winter, correct?
It is. She said in the beginning they didn't have enough manpower to actually close it for winter, but they wanted to.
All right, so maybe those improvements will start, as you said, 2023. All right, thank you very much, Katya. He said women should not be recruited into fields like engineering or medicine and law. So one meddlesome Boise State student decided to make sure that happened. Thanks to your donations, it soon will. Before we get to that update, though, let's make sure we share our number one more time. 208-321-5614. That's where you can send your text messages, your questions, your comments about the show. Oh, and don't forget your name and the hashtag, the 208.
Great shot there from Bogus Basin on Idaho Weather Watchers. Here's what's happening over the Northwest, and we do have an inversion in place, but something that I might mention, I'll call it a weak inversion because it's not as cold as what it really could be. And what's taking place is just to our southwest, you see this high pressure system. Warm air is actually coming up, but it's going over the top of the valley as cold air is trapped down in the valley. But of course, the cold air in the valley is not as cold as it could be because tomorrow, we've got a high of 41 degrees coming in. But out along the west coast, they're experiencing those temperatures in the 50s, but we still have some of that cold air is here in the valley. It looks like it's around at least for the next 7 days from what we can see as far as changes. But the difference here, 39 in Boise, 39 in Nampa, but Caldwell's 38. So mountains, you see 36 in Haley, which is warmer than valley locations down in Twin Falls, and that's very typical of colder air trapped at the surface and warmer air aloft. Now, in the way of the air quality, we're yellow in Ontario, we're green in most other locations there. We're green in Boise, but we're pretty close to yellow. It is yellow out in Meridian, Nampa, and Caldwell, and then it's green in Sun Valley as well as Twin Falls. So your 7-day forecast, 41 for tomorrow, 40 on Friday. Some fog could start to form, which will hold some of the temperatures down a little more as you see lows getting down into the 20s. Daytime highs, though, still above freezing, and some of those highs up around 37, 38 degrees lasting into the first part of next week.
We shouldn't be telling women what to do, and I think that's what this scholarship stands for. Instead, we should be providing opportunities for anyone to choose what they want to do.
That was Boise State marketing student Allie Orr telling us about the scholarship she started a little more than a month ago. It was a great idea spawned from a not so great situation. Here are the cliff notes. Boise State political science professor Scott Yenor gave a speech in early November to a group of conservatives in Florida. A speech in which he decried the idea of encouraging women to go to college and suggested instead we as a society should impress upon them the importance of being just mothers. Oh, he said a lot of other things that got a lot of people upset, and rightly so. And we've done several stories on this speech and the backlash that followed. You can find them at ktvb.com. But about a week after that speech started getting some attention, to show support for everything that speech said we shouldn't, Allie Orr decided to start the fundraising for that scholarship. When we spoke with her that second week of December, they'd raised $38,000, $25,000 coming in the first 3 days, which was good enough to fund an endowment for women who wanted to study STEM, medicine, or law-related fields at Boise State. Well, today, we learned that scholarship has reached about $75,000, an impressive number, and so far beyond what Allie set out to do.
Well, day one, my idea was, woo, let's hit $2,000. And then we hit 10K and I thought, okay, I'm going to shoot big and hit 25K. And now everyone's saying, go for it, 150K.
Why do you think this has garnered so much attention and so many people saying, I want to help?
This story, it has touched so many people. The amount of people on Facebook, even just today, that people have said, my 4th grade teacher told me to stay out of science, or a professor told me you'll never make it. This scholarship shows everyone belongs everywhere they want to be. And that's such a message that rings true for everyone that sees it. And I feel like that encourages them to donate and to maybe prevent that happening to someone else.
Okay, so I understand 4% of whatever that money is will go to a student.
Mm-hmm. Let's do some math. 1 second. So right now it should be at $75,000, it should be $3,000.
That doesn't seem like a lot.
I think about students that are in-state that maybe don't think they could afford Boise State. And the in-state tuition for Boise State is probably about $5,000. So getting that one scholarship, you've almost covered an entire semester. So that's such a leg up in your education that I think that's a huge impact in someone's life.
Allie wasn't far off. According to Boise State, tuition and fees for full-time undergraduate studies is $4,030 per semester. So in order to cover that cost in full, an endowment would have to reach $100,000. And the best thing about it is this scholarship will be a living thing, Allie tells us. 4% doesn't seem like a lot, like we said, but the rest is invested so the scholarship can be perpetual, so it can last forever, Allie says, like the legacy and the message that women deserve and should be encouraged to become engineers and doctors and lawyers and whatever else. Students can begin applying for this scholarship tomorrow. Lots of comments sent in during today's show, like a couple of them about the $1.9 billion surplus that Idaho is dealing with now. The legislature is in session. Paul wants to know, why doesn't the legislature work through what needs to be funded before cutting taxes? Priorities, Paul, I guess. Priorities. It can be difficult to recruit talent to a state with the lowest investment per pupil in public ed. The surplus is a direct result of underfunding education. This underfunding will keep many businesses from locating or expanding to Idaho, says Jack in Boise. A lot of people share that opinion in the State House. Like Jackie, we'd all like to stop hearing about COVID nonstop. But it's a global pandemic. More than 800,000 people have died and more still are dying. Jackie needs to wake up to reality and stop whining, not to mention the more than 4,000 Idahoans that have died from COVID. Thank you for sending that in, Jay Sweet. Maybe if everyone had taken COVID seriously and not politicized it, you wouldn't have to keep talking about COVID. It's a good point. How about a feature on positive things due to the pandemic? Maybe people learned a new skill or started a hobby. We need some good news, says Nurse Patty in Nampa. We've done that. There was a little girl who learned knitting from her neighbor. We've done a story about neighbors who got to know each other because of the pandemic. We've done those things. If you know of more, let us know about it. We'd love to tell their stories. It's surprising to me that a majority of individuals of our state argue we don't need to be interfered with by government or even other people, that we will take care of each other, but we can't even keep a natural wonder of our state clean. Disappointing, he says. See you back here tomorrow.